Okay, as promised that in CCNP collaboration, I'm going to cover E911, as E911 is one of the most hot discussed topic right now in the corporate world, because in North America that we live in, 911 is an essential service. It's a mandatory for pretty much any organization in this country. Even as a small shop as one-man show, must have must have a 911 service. So what we're going to talk about is a traditional 911 versus the new way of dealing with 911. We'll look at the emergency service overview, looking at the E911 challenges, talk about how E911 and communication server talks to each other, and all those other solutions. Now, emergency service, pretty much most developed country, even developing country, they do have emergency services. Whether they use it or not, that's different. Even my own country, Bangladesh, has emergency number. Okay, India, for example, 108 is becoming an emergency number. UK 999, or I believe 112. Hong Kong is 999. Canada and US 911. These are numbers, easy to remember number that you dial for emergency services. Okay, not for ordering pizza, by the way. So it is simple and easy to remember number. 3-digit service code allows automated call routing with a local public safety organization, and it's routed based on your caller ID. The whole concept of E911 is where the call comes from, not where the call is going. So the focus remains on the calling number, which is the most important thing. Okay. This E911 knowledge and the lab, I'll give you the lab guide. You practice that, you add it to your resume, again, your value increase. You as a voice professional, value will increase drastically. So try it, try to implement that. Even if you do not make it work 100%, at least go through the configurations. Okay. It's widely available for residential services because every house you can dial 911 and easy. One of the good thing about residential house is that in a residential house, the address is fixed, right? The number of floors are usually fixed. When you go into the house, you can maximum you'll have 4 rooms to look for a person, right? Whereas if it's a business, there could be 100 floor. It could be thousands of rooms in that room. Who knows, right? So one of the biggest challenge of 911 is the locating the individual who made the call. If it is a residential, it's very easy because they know which house, because your telephone number is mapped to the address of your house. They go to the house, they break the door, or you open the door, whichever works, and then they have to only look 2 to 3 house most, right? So, sorry, a room. Whereas for business, it becomes difficult, and if it's even more difficult if you have a big warehouse. The person could be sitting, lying down on a corner underneath a couple of card boxes. You never know. So this is where the problem or challenge of E911 comes into play. Now, in North America, the E911 has been highly regulated. A lot of province and state are creating laws where you must have E911. Some state or some province may not have such laws yet. Some cities, when you dial 911, it goes to special group of people, where other cities, if you dial 911, goes to the police station right away, depending on how big you guys the cities are. India, for example, is rolling out E911 based on the number 108. All Europe are trying to follow 112, and North America follows 911. Now, some of the terminology that you need to understand, and it's very important for you to make sure you understand what each one does. And not only that, also by putting these terms in your resume, what it does, increases the value of your skills. right? So keep that in mind. So PSAP, which is often known as Public Safety Answer Point, which is probably a part of your law enforcement team or maybe a third-party team sitting in somewhere in an office or room answering your calls. Okay, it's a bunch of call center agents who are answering your call. Now they could be highly trained law enforcement professional, or they could be just local, soccer mom or soccer daddy sitting in a room and providing a services. They may not have any other specialty other than just dealing with the product and services that handles the 911 call. So PSAP, when you call 911, PSAP is the place, a call center where the call will first come in, not to the police station. For big organization, it will be the PSAP. And in any given city, you may have more than one PSAP laid out depending on how big the city is. You might have 4 or 5 PSAP in Scarborough. Okay, it could be simply a room in an office, or could be even the police station. We don't know that. They don't usually advertise the location of that. Then you talk about ALI, Automatic Line Identification. ALI is a database. It's a database that contains your phone number and the address you belong to. Okay? So as a company, if I have a big organization, I will modify, I will create, I won't create. When I get my T1 or E1 line from a service provider will update the ELI with my phone number and my address. Because remember, my phone number today, I might have a phone number. If tomorrow I go bankrupt, that number could belong to someone else. When I disconnect the line, that number may be assigned to someone else. And when they assign that number, what they have to do, they have to update the ALI database. Because it may not be always in the same addresses. Also, when you move from your one location to another location, what do you usually do? You tell the Bell Canada, you call them, right? You call them, you say, hey, can you please move it? I'm moving to this location. They will send a technician. Technician will move the line. But then at the same time, they have to update the ALI database. Correct?
Right. This is a thing that they're doing recently, that they actually allow you to keep your number. Would that be an advantage to a system like this?
They allow you to keep your number. That's fine. But then when your address changes, your number has to reflect to the new address. So you're right. It's called number portability. So number portability allows you to go to Vancouver and may want to use the same number. Or maybe you want to move from Fido to Rogers and you still be able to keep the same number. But then whether you move from Fido to, somebody has to update the database to ensure that they have the right address. Correct. Then you have ANI. We all know what ANI is, your phone number, your caller ID. Then something called CUCM, Centralized Automated Messaging and Message Accounting. It's a special link from your office, for example, from my office, 705 Progress Avenue, to the 911 operator office, a specific router. So from your building to a direct cable going to the PSAP selective router. So this is like so right now most company, when they dial 911, what happened? The call from your office goes to service provider, like say TELUS or Bell or Rogers. They will then have a trunk link to the PSAP office or call center with a special link called the CUCM. Okay, but now they allow you to buy your own router, Cisco router, with an interface, with the CUCM interface in it, and then connect the cable directly to the PSAP. So you're bypassing the service provider. So this is a special network card that you need to buy. And then of course you have emergency service number, ESN. A unique number is used by selective router to identify the proper PSAP. So when a call comes from your office, the selective router, which is special router, is responsible for identifying which PSAP is responsible for handling your call. So it makes a decision based on a specific number. Okay? MSAG, Master Street Address Guide, maintained by the government agency, which identify which PSAP service particular area. So government has a list of all the PSAPs. Say PSAP X, PSAP 450 is for North York agent code area. PSAP 67 area is Danforth area. Okay, so all the address of the PSAPs are maintained in a database known as Master Street Address Guide. SR, Selective Router, a specialized telephone switch that route calls to appropriate PSAP based on the ANI and ESN number. So this particular combination of ANI and ASN, which will be used by this database, used by the database to select which PSAP server will be routed to. Then you have LEC, Local Exchange Carrier, that is your telephone company, local telephone company. Now in North America, the E911, the routing of 911 call through a selective router is usually done by your service provider. When you're home, you're choking on a pretzel, you dial 911, the call goes to Bell or Telus first. They will then route the call to the 911, and when they route the call to 911, they will advertise your caller ID and your phone address to them. Okay? It requires the use of ANI, which is your caller ID, and ANI used to locate the ALI record. Remember the ALI database? Address Location Identification Database. That is basically the database that contains your phone number and your address. ALI database record for each phone number mapped to a location. So the normal plain old telephony service, you dial 911, call goes to your telephone company's switch. It will then send a telephone company switch will have an SS7 or comma signals with the 911 selective router. Okay, so this is 911 selective router. And then from 911 selective router, you will have a comma or ISDN connection to the appropriate PSAP. And which PSAP is selected will be based on two elements. What address? The ESN number, okay, and the ANI. The ANI and the ESN number. The selective router will look at the ANI and the ESN number and decide which PSAP the call should be handled by.
So, which router will be storing down the Master Street address?
Sorry, repeat that.
Which router would be the router storing the Master Street record or the MS?
They have a special database for that. See that? There are special databases. Yeah. So the router will contact the database to find that information. Okay, so when the call comes in, the router contacts the route database. Okay, route database send the response request. So this is where ESN information is mapped, the master database. Okay. Now, the selective router, because master database contains what? The list of PSAP address. So the selective router send the information to PSAP. This PSAP will then talk to the ALI database, look at the caller ID and find their address. Master database, the selective router doesn't care about your address. He cares which PSAP to send the calls to. It's PSAP that cares about your address because they are the one has to dispatch the ambulance or the police to the right address. Make sense? Okay. So, wireless provider. So if you're making a 911 call from cell phone, it makes it a little difficult because you might be staying in Scarborough, but you could be in Mississauga where you're making a 911 call. So your address is not going to match. So what happened is, in this case, the 911 call will be delivered to the appropriate PSAP based on your satellite position. GPS, latitude and longitude. Okay, so one of the requirement is that the cell phone provider, the tower, has to notify your longitude and latitude numbers within 300 meters of the position. Can I give you radius? And that's the number. And again, it's still not 100% sure, because the pinpointing someone on a satellite is quite difficult. So there are challenges available still there for wireless. Caller location will be determined by the point of physical interconnect. Service provider will be responsible for updating that information. So what happened, as you move around, your service provider is updating the database, ALI database, with your ANI and the tower location and the longitude and latitude information, because that has to be on, because the cell phone users are always on the move. So that information has to be updated constantly, right? Because 5 minute you're in Scarborough, next 10 minutes you could be in somewhere in the middle of 401. Okay. The mobile voice provider, which even though mobile voice provider still have to complete the 911 call for you, even if it may not be 100% accurate, they still have to give that service. In North America, the important thing is that every phone, whether it is a VoIP phone, cell phone, you must give the 911 capability. Okay, so regardless of the mobile user is a customer. So if I am from, let's say I have my service provider with, what was that, Virgin, and I go to New York. So obviously I will use one of the local providers of roaming, right? Well, even though I am not their customer of T-Mobile, they still have to provide me 911 service. Okay, so the thing about this North America thing is that even if you're not a customer, you still have to provide the emergency services. So you look at it, if you get a phone, and as long as the phone finds some sort of signals, even if it doesn't have a SIM card, it still allows you to dial 911. Because it is something that service provider has to ensure. Remember, cell phone, you don't get signal based on your SIM card. The cell phone gets signals anyway. SIM card, it just tells you to register. SIM card does not, I don't know, you are electrical, you probably know better than me, but usually the cell phone has a signal receiver capability anyway. So even if you don't have a SIM in it, cell phone will get a signal, except you will not be able to register. But that signal should be capable enough, or service provider should be able to give you 911 through that particular signal. Okay? So service provider must identify the phone number and the cell phone tower used by the caller within 6 minutes of the request made by the PSAP. Service provider are expected to provide the latitude and longitude of the caller within 300 meters within 6 minutes of the request made by the PSAP. So let's say I made a call, 911, the PSAP provider. It would be nice if the customer say, hey, I'm calling emergency, I need an ambulance, please send it to this location. But what if he's choking? What if he's having a heart attack, he cannot talk? So in a situation like that, when a person is not able to disclose his or her location, it is the responsibility of the PSAP to find that location. So what will PSAP do in a situation like that? The operator in PSAP will send a signal to the service provider based on the signature of the wireless carrier and say, hey, I need the latitude and longitude for this user in 6 minutes. You better give it to me in 6 minutes. And if they don't give it in 6 minutes, then they're in trouble. By the way, in Canada, if our landline goes down for more than 90 minutes, do you know that the Bell, Rogers tell us they have to answer to the Justin Trudeau directly? They have to answer to him directly. 90 minutes. It happened once about when Harper was here. So that information PSAP will obtain as soon as the 911 call came in. So most of the responsibility of locating the user is actually is in the hand of the PSAP operator. Okay, so if you have a VoIP service provider, usually what the VoIP service provider does, it notifies the customer that, hey, if you're going to call 911, make sure you are in the location where whatever the address you gave it to us. The problem with the voice over IP call, it doesn't have a longitude and latitude. There is no wireless GPS signal on it. It is based on IP, and even that IP may not be accurate because it could be behind a firewall. So voice over IP becomes a very challenging, because you are behind a firewall. That means what I see from outside you may have a different address inside because of the netting concept. That's one problem. Second problem is that you might have bought the Vonage phone for your home, but then you went on vacation and you took the phone with you and you connected from Montreal. But then the Vonage knew that your phone number would belong to the address in Toronto. And Vonage cannot track you down based on your satellite signal because there's no latitude and longitude number. So voice become very dangerous. A lot of time voice phone, even from Cisco phone, you'll see they will put a little sticker that says, do not dial, if you dial 911, please make sure that you are calling from your home address. Or make sure you tell them the location. So that is the biggest challenge of 911 in a voice over IP. Service provider must maintain the physical location at which the service will be used, must provide an easy method for customer to update their location. So if you're Vonage and you decide that you want to move or you want to go for vacation for 3 months to XYZ, they must give you an ability to change your address online or by calling them. Even for that 3 months, they must be able to do that. They must complete the 911 call with the caller location and the callback number to the appropriate authority. Must inform the customer and obtain affirmative acknowledgement from the customer that any limitation of the 911 service. So this is why when you get a telephone from Vonage or from Comwave, they put a little note, a sticker, or they made you sign a paper that says that if you call 911, these are the rules you must follow. And if any of these rules are broken, that they are not responsible for anything that might happen. Okay. So this is what the last statement basically says. Now in Enterprise 911 or E911, where corporations are responsible for routing call to appropriate PSTN to deliver the call to the correct PSAP. It enables the PSAP to call back to the 911 operator, and if the ALI databases are used, then it will deliver the ANI to the PSAP server with the proper information. As far as the legislation and regulation, there is no general federal regulation available yet, but every state and provinces, they have their own regulations and they're updating, they're coming up with new idea. Canada might have one as well, and so on. So you may want to talk to your local telephone provider, say, hey, what are the regulations for 911? They will give you a handbook or something. Now, a legacy 911 flow, this is the building. You could be calling from the 5th floor, 10th floor, 9th floor, washroom, or 2nd floor, elevator, you got stuck, whatever. You call 911. The call will go over the PRI link to the service provider, right? Service provider will then check your caller ID, send that call to the comma interface or SS7 to the selective router. Selective router talks to the database, try to find out the caller ID. No, that's not the caller ID. The building number. Okay, so this is the customer number, the extension of the user. But every company have their own main number, right? They have the switchboard number. So usually that's the building number, 1001. BTN number, yeah. Now, selective router talks to the routing database, the MS, AG, the master address guide, looks at the number, find the appropriate PSAP. It find out that this number is responsible for this piece by PSAP 003. Call goes to PSAP 003. 003 will then contact the ALI database, find out the address is 10 Sahara Avenue. Okay, and then this guy will be responsible for dispatching the ambulance with this information. The problem is, he comes to the building, he does not know where to go. Which floor? Which bathroom? Which elevator? He has absolutely no idea. He only thinks he knows which building the call 911 came from. So this is why it becomes a very difficult, especially with locating the people. So because he could be coming from building 10, but the call may have come from another building. Why? Because you may have a local area calling, right, within your office. So you may have a second building, which you have a fiber connection that you have all the local area network. So that becomes even more challenging because he's in the wrong building. Okay. Nitin, doesn't make sense. Are you able to follow the lab? I mean the lecture, sorry. Are you still there or you went for a chai? Okay. Now, service provider ALI database versus private switch ALI. A service provider which will use the build to number, not building number, rather build to number of the circuit in the ALI database. So what happens is when you call your Bell Canada, they say, hey, I want a PRI line with 5,000 phone number, 5,000 extension. Bell will give you 5,000 numbers, but one of the number will be designated as a billing number. And that billing number will be used as a BTN number. Okay? ALI will then look up the returns, the service address of the circuit, and then ILEC or CLEC, which is basically the telephone company, is responsible for talking to the route DB and the ALI DB for update. If you're a private switch ALI, which accepts switch provided calling party number for ALI lookup. That means whatever the caller ID you send, that is the number will be used. The problem with the private switch, if you have 5,000 extension, 5,000 different numbers, because the caller ID will be different based on who made the call, right? Well, that is more useful if you're calling based on service provider ALI. But when you're doing private, it may be that the selective router will use whatever the caller ID you send. It could be the same number, it could be different number, it could be an individual number. No, but BTN number will show up on the service provider ALI. But if you're using a private, it doesn't have to be the BTN number. It could be 4 or 5 different numbers. So by breaking it down, correct. So circuit service will be multiple ALI address. So it may be the same circuit, but it might have 4 or 5 different entries. It might have 4 or 5 different entries. In this case, you are responsible for maintaining that database. So if you're a big organization and you have a lot of numbers to maintain, they will give you what they call is an Excel template. You can use that to update and then push it to the ALI location. So in this case, I got different buildings, okay, different phone numbers. And as the call coming in from this building, 911, comes to this PBX, goes out, this is the caller ID that is being displayed. So central switch takes the caller ID, send it to the selective router. Selective router takes that same caller ID, look up the database, find the PSAP, talks to the PSAP, PSAP talks to the ALI on the same caller ID, and find the address for that phone number. And if a different number calls, different building will be address will be returned. So this number and address mapping must be configured appropriately by the administrator. Okay. Okay. So all the ALI record must be updated within 30 minutes to 48 hours to get into the database. That will cost you 2 chai, my friend. All right, a customer request to repeat. You call from this building. This is your phone number, caller ID of the individual extension. The call will come into your local PBX, might be sent to San Francisco Gateway, could goes to service provider. Now, as the call goes to service provider, the caller ID does not change because you're sending your individual caller ID. The call goes to selective router. Selective router looks at this caller ID and find the closest PSAP. Once they find the PSAP, send the call to the PSAP. PSAP will then look up the database for this particular caller ID. Second call comes in, it might be totally different number. So from the same building, you could have more than one number coming up as your 911 number. And every time different number comes in, ALI database must have an entry for that number. This is just a thing. So ALI database, ALI record takes about 30 minutes to 48 minutes to get updated. So from the moment you push the information. If you have a non-DID phone, which ANI to send will depend on, of course, how you map it. Now, the trunk interface, you must get appropriate type of trunk, such as you might get PRI, SIP, or comma. All right, so as I was saying, that you need to have the right type of interface and also topology. They must be able to reach the proper selective routers. So if your company is big enough, you want to make sure that instead of relying on your service provider, PRI provider for 911 service, you may want to get a direct connection from your office to the selective routers. Okay, and of course with the money and everything, they will be willing to do that. So what kind of interface can I use between my PBX and the 911 selective router? Well, for local, it's going to be the comma interface. LEC will typically dictate the interface type. So what happens is, service provider might either. So what kind of interface you get to choose will depend. Service provider will usually dictate that. The reason for that is if you choose something and that they don't have it, obviously you're not going to work, right? So service provider will decide whether to use comma interface or if you want to use SS7. Okay, so either one will depend on what the service provider selects. Where the possible, whatever is possible, try to use a trunk that supports dynamic ANI, such as your PRI interface or SIP trunk. These are the type of trunk that usually support dynamic PRI, dynamic ANI. FXO and FXS are limited. Okay. If you're going to, if you use a comma, then it's an analog. Usually, it's analog line. That line is dedicated for 911 call only, and is direct connection to the selective router. For low volume or small location, you can use an FXO interface, but try to focus on getting a dedicated 911 interface or wherever is possible. Now, whether you need a dedicated or not, you may have to look at traffic engineering. Does your existing 911 trunk shared with other traffic? Usually, if it is a PRI, then they usually share. Okay. Most likely, if you use a PRI, it will be shared traffic. Do I need overflow route for 911 call? What if all trunks are busy? Then what do? A lot of company, what they do, if they have one T1 or one PRI line, they will have one FXO line as a backup. So in case PRI line is down, it will use FXO as a 911 path. You do not want to use the FXO for, let's say, regular call. You want to use it for 911 call only. Do you need to size your 911 trunk? So typically, recommendation is to get 2 dedicated trunk, wherever is possible. Best practice, 1 trunk per 10,000 lines. 1 dedicated 911 trunk for up to 10,000 lines that you have. Cisco Unified Communication and E911. The problem with unified communication, the location of the caller is very crucial in terms of placing the 911 call. Because IP address has no geolocation concept, user are no longer required the telephony admin to relocate the phones. Device location could be variable because today you're in Toronto, tomorrow it could be in Kuwait, next day it could be in Qatar. VPN in to use your phone. Imagine you go to India and you VPN into your office in Toronto and you dial 911, they're going to think that you're calling from Toronto because you're VPN'd. So your locations are variable. If you use a wireless, your signature will be different every time you move from one location to another location, right? Longitude and latitude. Device mobility, which we talked about earlier, right? That you could be logging in from Japan. So the information could be incorrect. So location is the key. In 911, location is the key. So what is the role of call manager? Call manager role is to match the appropriate pattern. When you dial 911, you gotta make sure you match the right pattern. Apply the proper calling and call party transformation. So if any caller ID modification that needs to be done is done at the call manager level. Select the appropriate voice gateway, route list, and route group. Recommendation, which is to allow the user to dial 911 and 9911. Because what happened is, most company, they say that to dial outside, you gotta dial 9. So a lot of employee, when they want to dial 911, they go, so I'm dialing outside, so I must be dialing 9 first. And if the 9911 is not configured, they will keep dialing that. By the time they might have a heart attack, stroke, and God knows what else. So you don't want to be liable for that. So make sure the 911 and 9911 is configured. Train the user to stay on a line if they misdial. Test your 911 functionality at install and on an occasional basis. Yes? Well, even if it is IP address, the call has to go through a PBX first, right? The PBX is physical. PBX is tied to a circuit. Now, if you're talking about SIP trunk, then it becomes more challenging. Okay? So that is where you start to update the database manually. Okay? Centralized call processing, where you have call manager at a central location. PSTN provide 9 to dial out, 9 and 911 should use site local gateway. So if you have a situation where you have more than 1 or 5 or 6 different location remote branch office, when you create a 911, the best practice is to use the local route group concept. Remember the local route group we talked about a couple of days ago? Local route group allows you to choose the gateway based on your device pool. Okay? So choose that. So this is going to show you an example of how calling search space also is important. So when you dial 911, it's extremely important that you configure the calling search space and partition properly. Why is that? First of all, every phone should have a device pool with a local route group. Every phone should have a calling source space applied to the phone itself, not necessarily the line. Every phone should have a calling source space that is applied to the phone itself. And that calling source space should have 911 at minimum. When you have calling source space applied to device pool, that calling source space can be used by all the lines on that device. So if a phone has 6 lines and you by mistake dial 911 from the 4th line, it should work. If you apply the calling source space per line level and you do not configure properly, chances are that one of your calling source space may not have the appropriate partition. So partition and calling source space plays a vital role as to what you can dial. Our usually most requirement is, so this is your phone, you have a CSS device with PT 911. You apply to this. You have 1, 2, 3 line, 3 extension. Whenever you dial 911 for any of this extension, this calling source space will be used. If I create if I want the user to give a long distance permission or international permission, I will create a separate CSS line level and put local PT LD PT long distance and apply to each line. So line level has higher priority. Line level has higher priority. So whatever the partition is in the line level will only apply to that line. So whatever the calling source space that apply to line level with those partition will be applied to that particular line. So if line 2 dials international call, in this scenario it's not going to work. Because line 2 doesn't have a calling source space. It relies on the calling source space on the device level. Device level doesn't have privilege to dial international, local, or even long distance. So you always create a calling source space as a device that you're going to apply to device level with the most restricted pattern. And with line, you then start to give whatever the permissions you want. So we already gone through calling source space and tradition. I'm not going to go through that. You already know what local route group is, right? All right, so make sure local route groups are configured properly. So as you can see, whether it's a Boston device, San Jose device, New York, whenever they dial 911, same pattern, the call will use the respective device pool to route the call. If you have device mobility, pay attention to that as well. Because device mobility will move based on IP address. Okay? So that has to be kept in mind. Whenever you have device mobility at 911, make sure you allow the phone to change the dial plan based on the location IP. 911 can be configured to use local gateway using local route group. Ensure that the station ID is valid for that particular location. Now, in North America, 911 is maintained by National Emergency Number Association, NENA. It's a non-profit organization founded in 1982, dedicated to provide effective and accessible 911 for North America that include Canada, US. How many countries are in North America? 100. What? Huh? No. How many countries in North America? Almost 20, 23.
What are you talking about? Just Google it.
Huh? 23, right? We don't even know our own country, man. What's wrong with us? There are approximately 23 countries in North America. You know that. The continent. Oh, NAFTA is 3 countries, yes. See, voice boots can teach you something better other than technical and stuff. Tomorrow will be cooking lesson. Okay. It's one nation, one number. Okay? That's the concept. Now, one of the most important things that NENA maintain is called the ERL, Emergency Response Locator or Location. It's basically a database contains location, which can basically location of address where the emergency response team will respond. Okay? Make sure my recording is still on. Yeah. This location will contain specific within a street address, and it limits the search area to smaller areas so they can easily find the color. So take a look at your building. The emergency response locator recommends that every floor must have its own ERL. Every floor must be identified as their own ERL. That depends on how big the floor is. If it is more than 7,000, then you may have to have 2 locations per floor address. So this is a building where you have 2 floor. Actually, sorry, 1 floor. As you can see, floor 1. But because it's so big, they divide into east and west. Okay, east side and the west side. Okay, so you will put address like 250 Sahara Avenue, building H, floor 1, west side. Okay, and then you'll identify the other side. So sometimes what happens is, if you go to certain building, you see bunch of sometimes different color tag, but you don't know what they are. Well, they could be for these purposes. Not that I'm saying they are in all cases. It could be for this purpose. So every location have their own emergency response location. So you may need 1 or more ERL based on each floor of your building. A recommendation is for every 7,000 square feet, you must have at least 1 ERL. More than that, you need 2. Okay?
Why is that?
It's just for trying to keep the search location as small as possible. Again, the concept of the problem is that most 911 call is associated with the caller ID, and the caller ID is part of your telephone system, right? But where is the telephone system located? Could be in the basement, and the person who make a 911 call could be in the penthouse. So now the emergency response provider comes in, he goes to the basement, but that's not where the caller is. So that's what the major problem with this corporate world. Residential is not a problem because when you go to resident house, it's only 2 or 3 rooms you have to search. So 3 people go 3 different rooms, you found your patient. But if it's a building, well, a building could have hundreds of different rooms. And forget about the room. Now you have a cubicle to deal with. Makes it even more harder. So ERL provide a boundary that derive from fire alarm boundaries, so smoke boundaries and sprinkler boundaries. So they basically follow the same category. So when fire department guys comes in and they design the sprinkler, they go to the same zoning concept. They say the one is sprinkler for every 500 square feet or square meter, whatever they follow. What is the goal of ERL? Location, be specific enough to provide reasonable opportunity for an emergency response team to be able to quickly find the person. When we design ERL, we go down to the port level, Ethernet port level. So when a call comes out, we will look at the PSAP will know which data port the call came from. Which data port? For example, pod 1, port 12. It will show exactly that. Okay? Now, on that port, you're going to say for this port, the address is 705, building 1, unit 101, room CCIE. Okay. Every emergency location or ERL must be identified with a number called ELIN, Emergency Location Identification Number. It's a valid North America phone number assigned to MLTS operator by appropriate authority, used to route the call to the PSAP to provide a specific ERL. Now, what is ELIN? It's basically a caller ID. But for what? Not for the building. For that location, the 7,000 square feet. So in our case, we have one floor, two division, right? West and east. If the call comes from west building, west coast. If the call comes from west building, west side of the building, the caller ID will be one thing. If it comes from east, the caller will be done something different. So the PSAP looks at the caller ID, will tell the ambulance that the call came from west side of the building on the 4th floor, so and so. Okay, that's what the ELIN contains. It's a phone number for every ERL. If you have 5 ERL, 5 caller ID will be selected. So when Bell gives you 5,000 phone number, you need to allocate certain number for ELIN. So why is that necessary? If someone from the west side of the building makes a 911 call and he hangs up the call or he had a heart failure or something, the 911 operator will call that number back. The call comes back to the same phone that made the call. ELIN may be the same number as the ANI. So where do you use the ERL and ELIN? It advocated by the NENA ways to summarize the location of independent of the device. It puts the phone in a group, like CCI group, CCNP group, or you can say marketing group. In an organization, you may have a ELIN for marketing and one ELIN for sales, depending how big they are. Requires dialable number, so make sure the phone number is correct. Allows non-DID to be located in the databases. ELIN and ERL are loaded into the route and ALI database. Phone can move freely now because those mapping are based on physical port. It doesn't matter on the phone. You can take the phone, go to another room, connect to the port. Whatever the address of the port, it will tell you that address. So phone could be totally mobile. So each side of the building, ERL, I'm going to have a different phone number as a caller ID. And on their database, they say the call comes from this caller ID, this is the address should be given to the emergency team.
So this caller ID will be different only for 911 or like even for other calls?
This is just for 911. These numbers are only dedicated for 911. So 10,000 square feet divided into 2 ERL, 5,000 square feet each, because the maximum should be 7,000. If you have 20,000 square feet, you will have 4 ERL, and each will have a different location. So you can put a little, like say if this is a very big floor. So what do? You put a little like a hangout, southeast, northwest, blue. So when an emergency responder come into the room, oh, there, it moves. Okay.
In some buildings, though, they have like a set of lights, like when the firefighter comes.
Like I said, it could be. You could even you can put a little notification. Go to the top floor. As soon as you enter, look for south red light. Some people put a color code. It's totally up to you. You go to hospital, they put all bunch of colors, right? Looks like you're like a La La Land, but reality those things makes different. So emergency calling without ERL, the problem is that when the caller ID will be mapped to the building number. So when the response team will come up to the building, but they don't know which floor to go. They don't know which room to go. Should I go left or should I go right? But with ERL, they may not have 100% good picture, probably 80 to 95% of it. So this is, so emergency calling with ERL and ELIN gives you more clear picture as to which building, which floor, which side of the floor, which cubicle and everything. The more descriptive you are, the better it is. Okay, so again, all the numbers are properly mapped and you will see the call goes through. So if you take a look at this, from this building, someone dialed 911, call goes to the operator, goes to the gateway, goes to the switch, and what the ALI contains is a phone number, the building, the floor, everything, details possible. So this is where E911 comes into play. I haven't even started E911 yet.
I started building my workflow.
So emergency responder, which basically follows the NENA recommendation, use common terminology with NENA model legislation, allows 9 DID employers numbers to comply with E911, and allows for post-call notification. Emergency responder, or Cisco ER, allows you to create the ERL, and each ERL will allow user to define a unique location description. So with emergency responder, you can create a very specific, for example, you can create an address, port 12, cubic 5, East Coast, lane 5, whatever, you know, row call, you can go by row, you can go by East Coast, West Coast, whatever the options you want to use. Each emergency responser will facilitate the association of one or more ELIN number, caller ID. Station ANI, so your actual phone number will be replaced with this ELIN number every time you make a 911 call. That's all it really does. Instead of sending your caller ID, it changes the number to ELIN number. ELIN will be added in the ALI database, which provide the address of your location, 911, and so and so. Now, emergency responder will route 911 call to the correct PSAP using a location-specific route or local route group. You send the calls to the appropriate gateway. The Cisco ESR will receive a PSAP callback, transfer the call back to the caller. Because Cisco emergency responder knows, because it's associated with the call manager, ER knows which phone the call came from. So let's say just Bushminder made a 911 call, and then some reason the call failed or call got hung up. When I, as a PSAP operator, when I call back, the emergency responder will transfer the call back to her. Now, while she called back, when she called, for some reason, I don't know, she called, she panicked, she ran away. Right? She's not there. Then Shri called at the same time. In the database, whoever the last person made the call, his phone number will be associated with it, not her. So when she made the call, and I try to call back, by the time I try to call back, you made a 911 call, that call will go back to you. That, hey, someone called 911 from this number. So whoever made the call, last call, will remain in the database. Okay? So call would be directed to the directory number that made the 911 call, made the last 911 call rather. Emergency responder feature, it automatically tracks the location of the phone, including move, add, and changes. The MAD, is it called MAD or Mac? Okay, and delete, MAD. Mac, MACD. MACD, okay. Not the McDonald. All right, it eliminates the need of manual ALI update. Route 911 calls to the correct gateway based on the location of the calling number. Provide correct and current location information about the 911 call via the ALI database update process. Alert on-site emergency responder. Now, the good thing about this, While Gushminder made a 911 call, goes to the 911 operator, at the same time, that call will be forwarded to the security guard downstairs. Or maybe the IT department, whoever. So now, while they take time to come in, and if you're in Bangladesh, you can kiss that goodbye. They'll take forever to come in. At least the security guard will reach you there before something bad happens. Because hey, traffic, there could be a catastrophe on the road. So just because our 911 comes in very frequently doesn't mean that that's always the case. They might have some other emergencies. So what happens is emergency responder will not only notify them, but they'll also notify other people that you designate. That could be the local security guard, could be the building, the gatehouse guard, could be your IT department team, whoever is on site. So some company may have 24/7 IT department, right? Call could go to them, whoever it is that you want. So you take the ERL and ELIN mapping, for example, divide the building. If it is 10,000, 20,000, you go with 4 ERL because each ERL is limited to 7,000 square feet. Okay. If it is 6,000 square feet, you could use 1. So this is an architecture of ER architecture, basically shows you. So your primary ER server connects to your call manager cluster, will connect to your switch, will connect to the gateway using the comma, POTS, SIP. Customer, it will have access to the customer ALI database. So what does the ERL locating, how does the locating of the phone works? ERL, Cisco ER, will use the MAC address, IP subnet, and manual configuration to keep update the location of the phone. ERL will also support switch port configuration. So what happens is every switch port in your switch, you will have to go and update the address. So you go to switch 1. Let's say switch 1 is connected to my phone. You could put a little description. Connection to Faisal's phone. It is a full-time job. And it is a quite high-paid job. Because there's a risk factor involved. And any job that has a risk, the pay is good. Take a job in Iraq. Pay is good. Yeah. So ERL will provide even support configuration switch port so that you can put a description of each port where they're connected to. Okay, so it is very important for you to keep up to date on those 911 ports. So because the call could come from any port. I might be running, and next thing I know, I'm gonna call 911. Which phone? Then whatever the phone nearest to you. That may not be in your phone. The important part is that if I am in that desk, I make the call, and the call get disconnect. When they call back, they know which port I am in. Or if forget about disconnect. What if I make the call and I drop dead? What if I drop? I'm having a seizure. At least they will know which cubicle to go. It might take them a little bit time, but at least they will have an idea. Because you will update the database saying that port number 5 belongs to 10th floor, west side, lane 5, cubic 5. They will run to that location. If not the emergency guys, at least the security guys or the IT guys will go to that lane, go to the cube, and know the person is there. And guide the other emergency responder. So that is the key part about this product. So here a couple of examples. Because you know your wiring closet, you know exactly which port goes where, right? Because everything is mapped, right? Also subnet. You use the subnet to decide where the phone is coming from. Building 1 could be one subnet, building 2 could be different subnet, building 3 could be different VLAN. Okay? So phone switch cannot be tracked behind a switch port, such as if you have the wireless phone. Wireless phone doesn't have a switch, right? So switch port. So you follow their IP addresses. Physical location, it will map their physical location to the IP address. Ability to track non-Cisco device switches. IP address will be used to assign the appropriate ERL. So you can also say this ERL has this ELIN number for these subnets. So more granular configuration. But it does require you to use a strict IP addressing schema. So your IP address has to be very highly controlled, precisely controlled. That you do not want to give an IP address for engineering team from that subnet. You don't want to give an IP address to someone who is in sales. If you follow this scheme. Okay. However, if you use a switch port based tracking, it has a higher priority than IP base. Why? Because switch port doesn't move. You may have one IP address in the morning for 5th floor, you go down to the 6th floor, you have a different IP address. But the switch port remains physical. It doesn't move with you. Yeah.
Suppose you have someone's in the networking team, and you have to basically interface with another department basically to keep track of the ports. So sometimes they'll say the troubleshooting come in, so plug in another one.
Well, this is why a company like that will follow something called ITIL process, that you cannot just go and keep testing any port. You gotta know exactly what you're doing. So yeah, if your network is like mine, then of course you're gonna have a problem. But if it is something, if it is a very structure-based company, they will follow something called incident management and change management process.
Yeah.
So that means before you even connect one single port, you will have 20 pages of documents saying why you're doing it, who's going to do it, what time they're going to do it, and what will happen after you do it. And you can ask those guys at the back. They do this on a daily basis. Okay, so how does the emergency call works? User dial 911. Call will go to call manager. Call manager forward the call to CR. CR will map the MAC address to ERL and ELIN number. CRL will redirect the call back to call manager with a modified caller ID. What will be the caller ID this time? The ELIN number, ELIN number. Which means the call 911 goes to CR. CR modifies our phone number replace it with ELIN number. Now it handed back to call manager. Call manager will make the 911 call based on route pattern, which will use local route group, send the calls to service provider. Right. So you can do on-site security alert. You can set up a web notification. So when somebody make a 911 call alert, the network team who are working 24-hour monitoring site, they could have an alert come up. Someone made a 911 call. Hey, their job is not just to monitor the device. They could be monitoring human life. Right? Telephone call. You can send a call to your security guard. They will pick up the call. They say someone is experiencing an emergency. You can send an email alert, because these days I have an email could pop up on my iPhone, right? Or you can even send a pager alert. Jeez, damn it, they still use pager. Okay. Now the callback. So the PSAP guys receive the call. They will call you back on the caller ID, the ELIN number. Call gets forwarded back to your CR, because call manager knows this number goes to CR. CR looks up the last person who made the call and transfer the call to his or her extension. So, that's it. Introduction. I think that's pretty much all that I had in mind for you guys. That's it. The lab guide, follow it. I believe it has been tested. You can test it out. I mean, I have the software. I'll upload it to my ISO folder. You can